Howdy folks, this is Justro at Metcalf Mills bringing you Story Time Tuesday. Got a little story for you today to fit this time of year. It always brings up memories for me this time of year of how things have always been and what we're always doing this time of year. And I'm going to share a little bit of that with you. I hope you enjoy it. On today's Story Time Tuesday, we're going to talk about things going on here in the mountains this time of the year. It's getting close to harvest time. There's a big harvest moon the other night. I love this time of year. Growing up, it's always been the time of the year that we'd, think about what we had to do, like gathering corn, which it'll be a little while before it's time to do that. Making sorghum, cutting your cane, and it's about time to do that. I checked the sugar in it today, and it's getting pretty close. Probably next week, maybe. I don't know exactly when. I usually judge it day by day. I'll check the sugar one day and strip that day, and cut it, or wait till the next morning. Usually I like to try to strip it and cut it. Ah, these chickens. Go on, get out of here. Go on. Get out of here, man. I'm working. Go on. Get out of here. Get out of here. Go on. Chickens wants to stay around here with me. I reckon they like me. But anyway, like I said about making sorghum, it's getting about time to do that. I'll be stripping it sometime soon, and I usually, when the sugar gets just right, I'll go ahead and do it right then. And you don't know, it depends on the weather and different things as to how it's going to go. But time to harvest your winter squash, and if you got any, and time to dig taters, dig your sweet taters, and dig your Irish taters. And my sweet taters, there's been a few people asking about them that I found in the basement that I growed some slips off of for seed for next year. They done pretty good, but every time I'd get ready to make a video and show them, the deers would come in that night and just mow them down, and they looked awful. And every time I was getting ready to do that, to make a video and show you them sweet tater plants, the deers would come in. They didn't do it every day. It was just so many days, and I kept thinking, well, maybe they'll leave them alone, but that was the wrong thing to think. So I'm hoping I got some decent taters for seed for next year. But anyway, I finally got some bone sauce from Billy, but they had really mowed them off a few times. It was my own fault. I could have got it any time. Billy always says, anytime you need it, you just holler. So anyway, I hope that the sweet taters made something. I'll show you when I dig them. And we still got to get all of our other taters dug too, because the old tater-tarian, he don't hardly feel secure in the fall of the year if I ain't got all my taters in the root house. So we'll be doing that for long. And another thing we always done about this time of year was cut wood for winter to heat with. And that was always one of my favorite things to do. We'd all work together, Mother and Daddy, what they was able. Daddy would do what he could, which wasn't very much. Mother would help what she could. A lot of times I'd get wood. My brother would help get wood. My sister would help get wood. It's just a big thing. You get your wood pile up, and that's like money in the bank. You got heat all winter laying there. But I want to go back and talk about the value of wood and heating and cooking. In the olden days, they didn't have nothing in these old houses around here. Some of these old log houses especially didn't have nothing but a fireplace in there. And they cooked right on the fireplace. And that's what my grandpa said. He set up at the grandma house, which I've done a video on. I'll try to leave that link to that video in the comments. Or down, not in the comments, but down in the description. Bear. My mascot. I'll try to leave a link to that video down in the description so you can go back and watch it about Pap and Grandma's old log house up at the head of the creek. But what I was going to say is my grandpa told me that Grandma up there, which would have been his grandma, she cooked on the fireplace 3 meals a day when they, when they first started out, when they Pap built the house, and she cooked on the fireplace 3 times a day, 3 meals. And then later on, people got wood cook stoves. And the old-timey wood cook stoves, they took this little small wood, little pieces of wood, and they didn't have no draft control much on them. I mean, they didn't keep air out, so your wood would burn up fast, which that's what they wanted, because in the summertime, when they was cooking on that thing, they didn't want to keep a fire in it no longer than they had to. It'd heat the house up too much. So, them wood cook stoves come in. I don't know when they first come in, around, I guess around the late 18s or the early 19s, and most people was able to get them one, and that's what my grandma cooked on all her life. And Mother had one in her kitchen for years, and then had one in the basement when they built this other house. And I always had a cook stove pretty much when I hadn't had one in a few years, but I've got that. I've got the videos of building that flue last winter when I got sick and I didn't get it finished, but I'm gonna finish that flue here before long. And we went and got our little cook stove and got it moved in, and I'm looking forward to trying it out. And yeah, that'll all be in a video, finishing that flue, and I'll show you our setup and how it works and everything. But cook stoves and wood, I've got wood for some great aunts. When I was growing up, I'd get wood for some great aunts and my grandpa and grandma, after my grandpa got where he wasn't able, and they wanted their stove wood busted up real fine, because when you go to heating the stove, you want fine wood so it'll burn hot and heat the oven up, and you cook on there too. And my grandpa, he liked locust wood. Now, locust wood is hard on a cook stove. It'll burn the grates out of them. It'll burn them up after so long. It just burns so hot. Some people use poplar for stove wood, which burns hot and fast. Some people use pine. Some people didn't want to use locust because they know it'd burn the stove up. But that's what my grandpa liked. He'd always tell me, bust it up good and fine. He liked it fine, little fine wood. And he put that locust in there. Boy, you talk about building a hot fire and browning some biscuits and cooking. You could really get it done with that. I've been in my grandma and grandpa's kitchen when they used that cook stove all the time, and they had a thermometer hanging up there in the kitchen window there. And that thermometer registered 120, and I've seen that thermometer hand trying to push past 120. So right there in the kitchen, and they used it all the time, didn't pay it no attention. But I've cooked on a fire a little bit in my life, out camping and, and one thing and another, and it's a different thing, but it makes good wood when you go to cooking out on a campfire. Or not good wood, but it makes good food when you're using wood and cooking out on an open fire like that. Somebody, I can't remember if it was William down at Perma Pastures or who, but somebody was talking about when the wood burns, the elements come out of it. That's all that's left when you burn a piece of wood, is the elements out of it. So my understanding, when you burn wood, them elements comes out, and somehow they get into the food, and that's what makes it so good. I mean, it's real. It's just, there ain't nothing like it. And it's just different all the way around. I've cooked a chicken over the fire, and man, it was good. And I've cooked stew and just all kinds of things. Sometimes, if once in a great while, me and the girls has a steak, I'll cook that on a wood fire. And it's awful good. But when you're gathering wood any time of year, some people gets their wood early in the summer and lets it season out good, and that's a good thing to do. But I never did like to cut wood when it was real hot outside. I like to wait till it cools down just a little bit and cut it. Sometimes it will take it a little while to dry out, but it'll dry out. And if you cut a tree down green, you always want to do that between, say, October, November, up until about March. Because during that time, the sap is down in that tree. You wait till about April, that sap starts rising when springtime comes and it warms up. That wood won't be near as good. It won't dry out as good. Even if you're cutting timber for lumber, if you cut that timber in between October and March, the lumber that you saw out of that timber will air dry a whole lot faster, and the quality and strength of that lumber will be so much better. It's unbelievable how much difference that makes, but it does. If you don't believe it, you try it and see. And there's different times of the moon when you can cut timber, and it works a lot better. I'll have to do a little research, and we'll have a video on moon signs and how to work with all that sometime. But cutting wood, we'd always just cut it usually off of the mountain here or somewhere close by. Cut it up and haul it in and bust it with a go devil and a wedge. A lot of times, if you couldn't bust it with an axe, and stack it and let it dry and use it all winter to heat with. And there's different kinds of wood, you know. Some wood we didn't want for heating, like poplar. We never did burn much poplar wood for heating. It burns up too fast, and it's kind of ashy. It leaves a lot of ashes. If we could get maple and bust it, I finally got a wood splitter, and that helped a lot with some of them big old tough blocks of wood that you couldn't hardly bust with an axe or a go devil. That wood splitter, if it couldn't bust them, it would cut them in two. So it worked real good. And Daddy, he'd help me bust wood with that splitter. I put him an extension on the handle there, and he could sit in a chair, and he could run that splitter up and down, and I'd handle the wood and stick it over there, and he'd run that splitter, and that tickled him to help me bust wood, because he wasn't able to do it no other way. I always liked locust wood, and when I was doing a lot of construction, anytime I cleared land or house seats or roads or anything, I'd get every bit of locust wood I could and bring it home to them. And I tried to keep them in just solid locust wood because that's what they liked. And like I say, locust burns hot. It heats real good, and it'll hold fire like overnight. You know, you put a big stick of locust in the heater the night before and get it hot and close the drafts up on it and pull the damper, and the next morning, while you still got a good hot fire there, and you just open up the drafts and throw your damper open and throw some wood in there, and it'll take off burning hot again. And some other woods we'd burn is white oak. We never did burn much red oak. A lot of times it'll be wet and it'll spit water and whatnot, and it don't burn good. But white oak makes good wood. It makes a lot of ashes, but it is good wood. Hickory is a good hot wood and lasts a long time, but it does make a lot of ashes too. Pine, we never did burn much pine because it's sappy. It's a good wood for you kindling to get your fire started, but if you're burning a lot of it, it'll set up your flue. We don't never burn much pine. Now birch, we've burned some birch before. A lot of times, if we had to cut a tree, if there wasn't no dead wood down to get, if we had to cut a tree, a lot of people think you have to split all your wood up, but we went for a lot of the limbs, the laps of a tree. When you cut a tree down, you got all them limbs. That's what we'd cut all them limbs up and make round wood down to that big, and that's good for starting a fire with. A lot of people would leave all that and just cut the big blocks that they had to split, but we had about as much round wood as we did split wood, and a round stick of wood, it'll last you a whole lot longer than a split stick of wood will when you put it in a heater to heat with. So we was big on that round wood. I mean, down to that size. I mean, if you're getting a fire started, you can throw that in there, and that fine wood, if you need to heat the house up in the morning, it's a cold night, well, you throw you some of that little wood in there, buddy, and it'll put her to heating. And in the olden days, people would use their horses and mules, and they'd go back up in the mountains, and they'd pull wood out behind a horse and a mule. They'd pull it out down to wherever they're working it up, and they would work their wood up that way. They didn't have no truck or nothing to haul it on. They might have cut some back in the mountains and hauled it in on a sled. I don't know, behind a whole team of horses, but I'm sure they did. But they would drag it out of the mountains with horses and mules and work it up. And the only thing about dragging wood is you get dirty. It gets dirt and mud on it, and it'll dull your saw. So you constantly sharpening your saw or having to clean off. But if you can just cut a tree down and cut it up right there, you don't have to deal with all that dirt and everything. But if you think about back in the olden days, people didn't have no power saws. They didn't have no chainsaws, no husky varmints or steel. And they had to cut all that wood up by hand. A lot of people used a bow saw, just a little bow saw to cut their winter's wood. And they had them big 2-man wood saws that they used. And then they got these wood saws that they, like I run my mill, they'd jack their old car or truck up and put a belt just around the tire on the car, because the way it was made, you could do that. There were fenders and everything wasn't in the way. So they'd do that, and they'd run this wood saw, and it had a table on it. You could take a long piece of wood and lay up on that table, and that table worked on a hinge. So when you lay the wood up there and you push it forward, it moved that wood up to the big round saw blade turning, and it'd cut your wood off. And then you slide it over and push it up again and cut your wood off. I got one of them wood saws. We might have to hook it up one day and see how it works. That'd make a good video, wouldn't it? I've never used that wood saw, so it'd be an experience. It'd be fun. Thing about them wood saws, you have to be real careful, because when you got a big old 24 or 30-inch saw blade turning right there up in the air, you have to be careful and not get close to that thing or make no mistakes and fall, because it'll kill you or hurt you bad, one of the two. Like this old fella I heard one time, he said he didn't really know what his name was till he was 12 years old. He said he thought his name was Get Wood, because that's what they hollered at him all the time. They probably had an old cook stove and a heater, and well, that cook stove, it takes a lot of wood to cook 3 meals a day. You probably talking, I'd say 40 sticks of wood, stove wood size sticks now, to cook 3 meals a day. Maybe more than that, maybe 50 sticks. But it takes a lot of wood to cook 3 meals a day. So he said he thought his name was Get Wood till he was almost 12 years old. And that's old Uncle Wayne over in Tennessee. I think the world of him. He's a good old feller. But it's getting that time now. Me and the girls is going to start rounding us up some wood and stacking it up. I like to try to find dead wood that's maybe fell down in the mountains and not cut no live trees. Just kind of scavenge around. A lot of time you can find trees that's already been cut around and get the wood out of them. And that's what we're going to have to start doing here pretty soon. Get us some wood up. We'll have probably heater wood and stove wood for the cook stove. But this new model cook stove we got, it's a airtight, so unlike the old cook stoves where you had to have real fine wood and they burn it up, this airtight thing's got a big firebox on it like a heater does, and it's airtight. You can shut it down and it seals off. It's got the oven on one side and the firebox on the other side. It's got a door on the front you open to put wood, big wood in there, and then on top, the eye, on the cooking top, the eye comes up, and you can put wood down in that way if you want to. But looking forward to using that thing and seeing how it heats and cooks. And once you get used to it, it's hard to do without. And we build a fire in October or November in the fall of the year, and if it stays pretty cool, I keep that fire going till springtime. It don't hardly ever go out once we build one, and keep the house warm, and it's easier. Seems like it's a lot easier to heat if you keep the house warm. It don't get cold and you have to heat everything up again. So we keep the fire going. If it's just dampered down and just holding it, that's what we'll do. Another thing about the olden days, I've heard Daddy talk about it, people didn't have matches. Back up in these mountains, as people was, you know, they didn't have much money and didn't have matches or nothing like that, and that's all they had back then. So they'd do what they call borrowing fire. They would go to their neighbor's house, take them whatever they had to carry it in. They'd get some coals out of their neighbor's fireplace, bring them coals back to their house, and they'd build them a fire off of the coals that they carried back. That's called borrowing fire. That's one way they had of getting a fire started, the easiest way. You imagine going to your neighbor's house and carrying some red hot coals back to your house to get you a fire built. You didn't have no other way to start it. There wasn't no lighters or fire starters or matches, or well, they might have as matches, but people didn't have them. You know, they just didn't have them here in these mountains where they wasn't making a lot of money and stuff, and they just lived at home, lived off what they could make. They didn't have, a lot of them didn't have matches for a while. But anyway, that's my story time Tuesday on fall of the year, getting wood and how it's been here in these old mountains. I hope yous have had a good day today. I'm glad I could share a little something with yous today. Thank yous for being patient. There's been several things going on, getting things done, and I'll share everything that I can with you, especially some of the harvest stuff that's coming up. And we got some mill work to do too, and I'll be sharing that with you. Like this video if you liked it. Subscribe if you ain't already. Tell your friends about me. Get you some wood for this winter. You may need it. This is Justro at Metcalf Mills. I look forward to seeing you next time.